Today's podcast is sponsored by fastbitcoins.com. Fast Bitcoins provides a simple way for people to buy Bitcoin directly from their bank account or with cash in physical stores. Their services are rapidly growing in availability across the UK, Estonia, as well as Canada, and they're launching in Australia soon too. Fast Bitcoins is committed to providing high-quality Bitcoin-only services. They want to make sure that the growing number of people interested in buying and benefiting from the possibilities of Bitcoin can do so easily, securely, and with as few distractions as possible. Learn more about Fast Bitcoin's range of services at fastbitcoins.com, including how you can earn Bitcoin for free through their referral scheme. That is fastbitcoins.com. Fastbitcoins.com. Go check them out. What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Now, on today's episode, we've got on a very special guest. He is a very well-known entrepreneur, investor, author of many, many books, blogger. He now does some stand-up comedy. He is an all-around genius. You know, this guy does a lot of stuff. I've been following his work for a while. I've taken inspiration from several of his books for a lot of the work I've done now with my music and my podcast and everything else. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the show, James Altucher.
Zuby, thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm a fan. You've done so many things, and I'm really happy you asked me to come on the show.
Awesome. I'm honored to have you on here, man, for real. So I've done a longer than usual, but still brief intro there. But for people who may not be familiar with who you are and what you do, how do you describe yourself these days?
It's so interesting because we always have to, why do we have to describe ourselves? Like, yes, I've written a bunch of books. I've started some companies, and many of my companies that I've started have failed miserably. And, you know, I'm always trying to figure out new ways to help people and then to maybe monetize that. But it's a very difficult thing. I've been an investor in other companies, and I do a podcast where I bring on, you know, many people who inspire me and who I'm curious about, and I want to have answers to my questions. And I don't know, I'm always trying new things and trying to get better and trying to understand things more and trying to be open-minded about what's coming next.
Awesome. You said you like to get answers to big questions that you have. So what are some of those questions that you're currently looking for answers for?
Yeah, I mean, you know, right now, unfortunately, we're in a very weird time, right? We're in a time when, you know, first we had this national or this worldwide health pandemic, and nobody really knew because it was a novel. It was called the novel coronavirus at first. This is the first time we've seen this. Nobody really knew what to do, and there was a lot of different opinions. And as is the case, most of the opinions and most of the solutions were wrong. Like, it's very rare that we encounter a difficult problem as a society and our first instinct is correct.
Yes.
So we don't really know what solutions we did were wrong, but they weren't optimal. I mean, maybe around the world, 100 million people lost their livelihoods. Many people died also from the health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Many people will have gone homeless by the time this ends. There's rioting in the streets all around the world, and we could point to the causes. There are very real causes, but there's also causes that have been simmering underneath the surface for not only the past week since the horrible events that we're thinking of, but also the past few months during this health crisis, and also the past 100 years of simmering anger. And people either want to look for a solution or they want to say, you know, now's the time to focus on love. And neither of those things really address the issues or solve the problems.
Yeah.
There really aren't solutions. I mean, if there's an earthquake, there's not a solution to prevent the earthquake. Mm-hmm. Things have been destroyed, and you know, it takes time to fix them. And we've had more than an earthquake. We've had a 500-year earthquake. Mm-hmm. And you know, so I think now's the time when it's more important to have questions than to have answers. Yeah. And so, you know, on the one hand, questions could be very personal, which is, you know, how can I be better? How can I improve my responses to to outside circumstances better? How can I improve as a human? How can I be more loving and more more, more open to ideas and so on? How can I improve in my life? And then there's, questions, which is, what can society do and how can I help with that? And sometimes we just have to listen, and that there aren't really answers.
Yeah, it's difficult, and everyone has a very different philosophy on this. I mean, whether you're, for example, on a individual by individual level, but also on a country by country level, you have total different ideas about what level of humanity these solutions and where they should stem from should even sort of begin. So you have people who are much more individualist and think much more from an individualist perspective. And then you have people and cultures even where the society is much more collective and people are willing to sacrifice individual freedom or individual liberty, etc., for what they consider the greater good of the collective. Whereas you have other people or other cultures where it's like, okay, I'm going to do what makes sense for me and perhaps my family and people who are immediately around me. And if everyone else does that, then as a result, we'll be okay. Whereas you've got this constant clash where you've got people who are minded that way, and then people who are like, no, 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 like we don't want to be thinking on an individual level here. We need a national level solution, or some people even a global level solution that is going to make all of this sort of work. And realistically, as someone who's tries to be pretty moderated and reasonable, I think you're always going to have a compromise there. And I think one of the trickiest things with humanity is that not everything has a solution, and
Yeah.
no one likes to admit that. And it's certainly not a great political platform for somebody to run on. But human beings are extremely complicated at an individual level, let alone when you put millions or hundreds of millions of them, or even billions of them in the same place. And yeah, you always want to strive to make things better, but I kind of feel like a big truth that no one ever really wants to admit is, there are problems that exist which we cannot solve, or which we
Yeah.
cannot solve without incredible levels of tyranny, where you just totally control and dictate absolutely everything people do. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting dichotomy, and there might even be a third element, which I'll get to in a second. But in general, I know for myself, whenever, so I've gone broke several times, meaning, I mean, and some people, I've been grateful that I've been able to have opportunity and have some success and sell some businesses. But then often, because for whatever reason, most importantly, because I'm probably somewhat of an idiot, I've gone dead broke after making money and having opportunity and having the opportunity to do good with whatever money I made. I had a family to raise, and every now and then I would make this money, I would lose it all after stupid decisions, and I would take the individualist approach. I would say, okay, nobody's going to help me.
Mhm.
There's never been the case that anyone in the world has ever woken up and said, I can't wait to make James Altucher rich today, or I can't wait to make James Altucher successful today. That's what I'm going to do today.
Mhm.
So I've always been individualist in that, after a period of feeling sorry for myself on different occasions, I would say, okay, I need to keep my physical health up. I need to make sure there's no toxic relationships in my life. I need to keep my creativity up, because that's the way I'm going to climb out of this, is by being creative, more creative than everyone else around me.
Mhm.
And I need to surrender to the things that I can't control. And that's been good enough for me. Like if I stay physically healthy, I won't be so sick that I can't be creative. For instance, if
Mhm.
I'm not arguing with a spouse or a partner all day long, I'll have time and energy to create and succeed. If I don't focus on things, or if I focus on things I can't control, I'm never going to be able to have the time and energy to focus on the things I can control, which is my own potential success and feeding my family and so on. And I've had the opportunity several times to go through this where I've hit bottom and then come back, by exercising my creativity, by trying and experimenting with different ways to help people, by figuring out and experimenting different ways to make money to support my family and have some degree of success. But then you're right, there is this society level where you kind of, at what point does the individualist have to also acknowledge the collective? And so you can say, like you did say, which is that, hey, if we all focus on being the best version of ourselves, that's going to be the best for the community. And I happen to believe that, but then there are structural issues with the community that also need to be addressed, because some people, it's a little harder for them
Sure.
to help themselves. And I, in some ways I've been fortunate, in some ways I've not been fortunate. In some ways my family has been fortunate, but in some ways, like many families who came out of, war-torn Europe, for instance, they've also suffered. And it's hard to know what the solutions are, except to say, have I taken care of myself today? Do I have toxic relationships? Did I exercise my creativity? Now, can I focus that creativity on helping people who haven't necessarily been able to help themselves to now? So I kind of lean towards that. But at the same time, you can't look at today's situation and say, well, here's the solution. Everybody should just love a little bit more, because that's not going to happen. It's not like everyone's going to say, oh my gosh, James just said I should love people more. What am I doing? Like, it's just not going to happen.
Oddly enough, though, you say that, but I think it's good for people to have the reminder, because you have got people out there who are essentially saying the opposite at this point. They might not want to admit it, but they are essentially saying, actually, we should hate each other a little bit more, whether that's on, political lines because someone votes a way you don't like. And so you feel it's totally appropriate to just hate them and demonize them and, not even associate yourself with them. You've also got some people who are doing this along racial lines, or in some cases, gender lines, et cetera, and are just saying, like, look, white people have done this, or, black people have done this, or brown people have done that, or this religion does done this or that. I think it's actually important to have those, as trite as they may feel sometimes. I know I feel sort of cheesy or corny when I sort of say something like, just love each other. Don't judge each other by the color of their skin. Sometimes I'm kind of like, I shouldn't have to say this, but I do see people, sometimes with very big platforms, who are really stirring that pot of division. They're sort of claiming they don't like division, but they're sowing the seeds for it and reinforcing that day after day. Maybe they're not aware of it.
I agree. And I think there are these platforms of hate that are sowing division. And I feel bad for those people where they are getting some degree. Nobody does something that they don't want to do. So those people who are, preaching hate and anger and reminding us of the reasons to be angry, they have reasons for it. Like you can't say there's something wrong with them, and you can't say, hey, you should change your mind. They're going to do that because they're getting something out of it. Like, for once, maybe, after a lifetime of being put down or have status taken from them or have their pride taken from them, this is a way they can get status. They have a platform now where hate is the only thing they've seen. So it's the only thing they know how to gain status. And so do you fight them? Do you try to be a little bit louder with words of love? I think that the times when I have felt the most, let's say, internal, just peace with myself is when, I've been able to say, look, I can't control this. And we're on this world for such a short but beautiful time. And I'm with people I love, or I could choose to not be with them. And so these are the moments when I sort of surrender to that I feel the most love for others and the most hope for others. And I guess I hope that wears off on the people around me.
Yeah.
And I hope that creates opportunities for myself, because people see I'm someone to trust versus others that they don't trust. But then I look at these situations, like I remember in the beginning of this pandemic, I was scared, but I was also scared of the lockdown because it was very clear it was going to create, uh, national calamity. Like,
Yeah.
you have, and I don't mean to sound like a populist, like you have people who I think in government who are a little out of touch. And, if you go to these food lines in New York City, for instance, all through this pandemic, there have been food lines around churches. People go on Saturday to get food for the week, and it's all ethnicities, all ages, all backgrounds, but people lost their jobs. Many people don't have a banking account, so they couldn't get the stimulus checks that in the United States that were given out. And so they needed food, and the police would come and shut down the food lines because
Oh,
everybody
wow.
wasn't keeping 6 feet apart, which was this sort of senseless law. Now, because now we see what they're not stopping. So it's not like, these laws seem sort of arbitrary. And so then um oh, it says my internet connection is
Yeah,
unstable, but
it dropped out for about 5 seconds, but it's back now. Your thing is flickering red though.
yeah.
Yeah. It's
All right,
back. It's
well,
back. It's back in the white, which is good.
yeah, I guess
Okay.
worst comes to worst, I'll slow the video or something.
Okay. Carry on.
um but so there's all these structural, like, I was afraid with this economic lockdown that it would cause too much homelessness, that too many people would suffer, and that the ultimate result, I remember having this conversation with my wife in January, the
Mm.
ultimate result could be some sort of deep societal unrest.
Mm.
And it might be because everyone goes unemployed in a lockdown, or it might be who knows what else could happen that could stir the pot. And
Yeah.
that's what happened. So I'm not saying, oh, these riots aren't about George Floyd, who was horribly killed in
Mm.
Minnesota, but there is a component that everybody's just angry. Everyone's just been locked at home and told not to work, and told, do this for the greater good, when ultimately the greater good might have been, we don't know, might have been, hey, maybe 40 million people shouldn't lose their jobs. And a lot of those people are people who weren't, you know, who
Well off to
weren't
begin with.
well off to begin with. That's right. You know who the anarchists are? The anarchists are, and I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, the anarchists are the billionaires. A billionaire can do whatever he or she wants.
True.
No one's going to stop Elon Musk from doing anything. He
No.
can open up his factory and say, arrest me if you want. No one arrested him. He could send a rocket into space, and power to him. Like, he could
Yeah.
do whatever he wants. And the rest of us, we have to stand on line 6 feet apart. And I think I'm not
Unless you're
blaming.
looting.
Yeah, unless
Yeah.
you're looting. And
That goes
and
out the window.
and even then, like, I don't, everybody doesn't understand, like, well, if you're looting now in New York City, the police were not allowed to arrest anybody. They were just standing there watching the looting, and often the looters would turn on the police because they were angry.
Mm.
And some people just look at this on their Twitter feeds in the morning, and they say, oh, this is ridiculous. Maybe it is ridiculous, but this is also reality. This is the world, and it's
Yeah.
certainly not the
Yeah.
worst situation that's ever happened. And we do have to decide as individuals how we're going to handle it. Do you join the protest? Do you try to stop the looting? Do you join the looting? Do you join the police? Do you leave the city? Do you board up your stores?
Mm-hmm.
All of the above. Like, again, I have to think, there are reforms needed, and there is discussion needed. And there's also other forces at work. There are people who want people to be angry because they're angry, and they've been taught to be angry. So they're in the protests too for the wrong reasons. I don't know, but I guess I agree that what I had to do for myself was, when I was starting to be angry about the pandemic and the lockdowns, and the lack of real rational discussion between politicians and leaders and medical officials and so on, there was no coordinated solution. There was nobody who said that. Nobody even had the right math. Like,
Yeah.
every mathematical model was different. The results of the pandemic were much different than people thought they would be. The results of the economic lockdown were much different than the best economists in the world thought they would be. And so at first I was like trying to convince people, don't you see? And I felt myself getting really angry, and I was writing emails to presidents and governors and this and that. And I was, talking to my readers like, this is how you should look at the data. And I was largely correct, but my solutions weren't.
Yeah.
Writing emails didn't do anything. Nobody was going to change their minds because of something I said. So at some point I decided to lean into the uncertainty, and which is uncertainty. The world's filled with uncertainty. And so by leaning into it, I was able to say, okay, I don't know the answers to these things, but I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to talk more to my children. I'm going to try to improve my writing. I finished a book that I hope in the long run will be helpful to people.
Cool.
I, I in general tried to focus on what I could do for myself, and and that's the most selfless thing you could do. Me writing emails to Trump's economic advisors didn't help anybody. And, but being a voice of, hey, here's what you could do to help yourself and to help others and to maybe love more or learn more, that's what I was able to do.
Yeah, and I think that's what you've been doing for a long time. And there are a lot of people out there, including myself, who really appreciate it. I think probably before you knew who I was, or before we'd followed each other on social media or had any interaction, I'd already read a couple of your books and come across a
Thanks.
few blog posts and was like, yeah, okay. And that's one of the greatest things I think about being a producer, right? Being someone who creates and puts stuff out, whether you're a musician or an author or a blogger or an artist, is you actually are impacting people. Like, I can guarantee you the impact you have on the world is far greater than what you think it is, right?
Yeah,
Because
I I don't even know if I believe that because, life's hard, and
I'm like, take the compliment, take the.
yeah, I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, sorry, but you were saying why
Well,
why aren't you
it's
sure?
just that it's hard to everybody's trying to do their best,
Mm,
and again in March, I think I was trying to be a voice of optimism for people
mm.
who didn't know, would this pandemic kill 100 million people? I mean, the first article I ever saw about coronavirus,
Oh
the New
gosh.
York Times said 140 million people are going to die. And clearly that was not true. Then there was
No.
models that said 10 million people would die.
Mm,
Clearly that wasn't true.
mm,
And so I was trying to just interpret the data, but I felt myself also trying to, it's like when you play sports and the ball is already out of your hands or feet or whatever, but you try to like mentally move the ball so it goes in the direction you want, and that's just not possible.
mm.
And the best you could do is just make your form in the sport the best. And viewing life as a sport, you kind of have to just focus on your journey and your process and not the outcome.
Yeah.
Did you kick the ball right?
Hmm.
Okay, whether it got to be a goal or not is out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think in the social media age, though, especially, I mean, however many people, I mean, firstly, it would be interesting to know how many people, like, sometimes I wonder how many people know who I am, right? Like, I do wonder, especially in the past year. I can see numbers online. I can see how many followers I have. I can see how many views and things stuff get. So I know it must be like in the millions, which is already kind of weird, but like, you don't know. And even in terms of how many people have read your book, how many people have read your blog articles, how many people have seen your posts, not just people who directly follow you, but stuff gets shared out. And so yeah, that's why I say I think you've had some impact. You have fans and followers and readers, but you certainly have more than you even think you have. That's kind of what I'm hinting at.
Well, let me ask you this: like you have also have this impact, and you've created so much work in whether it's music, now podcasting, your social media presence, and so on. And when do you feel happiest? When do you feel happy? Might be the wrong
Mm.
word. When do you feel most content?
Most content is probably when I'm quite detached from it and I am with my family or with my friends and I'm doing stuff that's offline and I'm away from that. I'd say that's when I'm most content. I would say though, when I most feel, um, if I meet someone in real life or even, the multiple DMs and emails I get from people who are telling me that I've inspired them or affected them in some way, that makes me feel very happy. Like that's what enables me to go through the nonsense, right? That's what enables me to wade through the garbage comments on Twitter and the YouTube comments and everything that I
Right.
don't particularly like reading. If I know, okay, what I'm doing is genuinely having a positive impact on people, then I can kind of bear any negativity that comes with it.
And both things are fine, right? So if you think about 20,000 years ago, um, both of your thoughts there, both of your feelings of happiness are represented by, let's say, ancient tribes, where if you go hunting and you catch a wild boar
Mm.
and you bring it back to the tribe of the other 30 primates that you're tribing with, they're going to be, hey, Zuby, you did great. This is great. Oh, we've been so hungry. Thank you. So
Mm.
that's going to feel good. And then after you eat and you're satisfied and the sun's going down and you're telling stories to your children and you're with your spouse, you're also going to feel good. That contentment of like, oh, it was a good day. I'm satisfied. Things are, you know, things are peaceful. Both of those feelings of happiness and well-being are good. It's kind of two sides of the same coin, because we have to participate in society, but we also have to be satisfied with that participation at the end of the day. And but I often criticize myself, like, oh, I shouldn't always, want the likes on a tweet,
Mm-hmm.
or I shouldn't always try to count, how many are my downloads more today than they were
Yeah.
yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
I should, why is so and so getting so many downloads? He's just doing it because someone shouted him out and he paid
Mm-hmm.
that person, and you know, it's a hard thing to live,
Yeah, it's a tricky
and
one.
yeah, and to be content, and because all of those feelings are good, and it's just a balance. I've been trying to learn for myself the balance between that dopamine fix of more
Mm.
and more and more, and
Mm.
that serotonin fix of being satisfied looking at a sunset.
Yeah.
And then there's fear, because then you see the world situation right now and there's so much uncertainty. And so on the one side, you could take pleasure knowing that, hey, I can lean into this uncertainty and find out a little bit more who I am, and I can have questions without answers, and be proud that I don't need to know all the answers, and instead, focus on myself, and observe and learn, and try to participate, but not try to force an outcome. And on the other hand is, oh my gosh, this is so irrational, everything that's happening. I need to do something. I need to be angry, or I need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
fix things. And right now, things aren't easily fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no solution.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about a lot, which I don't hear a lot of people articulate, but I think it's a big question both on an individual level and also on a national and international level, especially when it comes to things like foreign policy. And this is a question, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, which is, to what degree and to what extent should we care, or should I care about things that are outside of my control and outside
Yeah,
of my sphere of influence? And I think that's a real interesting question.
that is an interesting question, because if you care, let's say you're having a hard time with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're not such a good father. Let's say you're not such a good spouse, but you really want to protest against the war in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what what do you know? Like, if you can't, they always say, if you can't take care of yourself, or if you can't clean your own room, how are you going to clean the world?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably largely true, because there's so few things we have control over. Like, you and I will never stop the war in Afghanistan, even if we were 1,000% against it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people elect leaders, and then the leaders change, and you hope for the best. And you know in the United States, we go from one leader to the exact opposite, to the exact opposite,
Mm-hmm.
and we're still in the war in Afghanistan. But what I can do is, I can say, you know what, I'm going to write down every day 10 ideas of how I can help things. And every day I'm going to exercise that idea muscle. And every day I'm going to try to send my ideas out into the world. And some seeds will get planted, but most seeds won't,
Mm-hmm.
like any garden. And I think that's all we can do. We can't really, even if someone's the president of the United States or the prime minister of England, they're one person out of hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
They're not what are the odds they're really going to know the solution for
Hmm.
anything? It's very slim. They've
Yeah.
spent years and years, decades of their life trying to pander to everyone who would vote for them and pander to everyone who would like them. So they don't even really know what their real opinions are. They get too addicted to putting on the best mask for whatever costume party they're attending.
Hmm.
And so, again, I always try to say, how can I remove my masks and the costumes I'm wearing? Like, I used to think my self-worth was the same as my net worth. And I would get horribly depressed when I started out with net worth of zero,
Hmm.
and I would get horribly depressed later when my net worth would go to zero or below.
Hmm.
And it became kind of real to me that if I didn't start improving my self-worth, I was probably going to die or not be a good parent. And then what would my kids do when they're older?
Yeah.
And what would my friends and family do if they saw me constantly, being such a negative source of energy?
Hmm.
And, again, I don't think, again, like in March and April, I was trying to fight. I was trying to say, look, you know, Mr. Economic Advisor, this is what's going to happen. And I agree the pandemic's important, but here's what you could do about the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I had solutions for everything, maybe.
Yeah.
And then and I sent them out and it didn't do anything.
Hmm.
And yeah, I had to relax and say, okay, what people need now is feelings of safety, feelings that this is not going to last forever. Do what you can to improve yourself or to keep calm or to help your family, but your job's not going to be around tomorrow. You might not have gotten the stimulus check. This is what you could do instead. And this period will end. And again, we're on this life for a blip of eternity. And so what can you do today to make that tiny blip worth it? I always imagine this. I imagine when I wake up in the morning that, I'm an alien from another dimension, and I just landed in this body. I have vague memories of what this body does and who this human being is and what this planet might be that I've just landed on. And I'm leaving in 24 hours. I'm only here for 24 hours. I must have a mission to do,
Hmm.
and the mission is a positive one. I know that, but I have no idea what it is. So I better begin now. And that's how I try to view the world at the beginning of each day.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I mean, man, there's a lot there. I mean, with what you were talking about with this situation with the pandemic, etc. It's interesting. I feel like 2020 has been a great experiment in anyone who is remotely interested in human psychology at an
Yeah.
individual level and at a group level. I can't remember another time where in such a short space of time you've had so many different, from mob mentality to binary thinking to cognitive dissonance to social shaming to, right, all of these weird things that we know exist in the human psyche. It's like one after one, we've just, or even all together, we've just been experiencing all of them on a global scale.
Yeah,
And what,
you're
yeah.
right. I can't think of another. I mean, the closest I could think of is 1968, where you
Mm,
have Vietnam, you have Martin Luther, at least in the U.S., Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was assassinated. There were
mm,
riots during the presidential elections. I mean, that was probably the closest, but I would say you're right. This is worse because on top of it, you have this social
social
media
media.
where everybody could react
Yeah.
anonymously and with such fierce anger so
Mm.
quickly that it gets into the psyche at a much deeper level.
Yeah. One of the weirdest ones out of those that I've been seeing is just this binary thinking and false dichotomies. That's the thing I
Yeah.
find really strange. So, with the pandemic, it was like either you want, it almost became a meme, right? Either you want to just lock down and stay at home forever until nobody ever dies of anything ever again. And if you do that, then you care about people and you care about health and you don't want anyone to die. Or you want no lockdown and nothing whatsoever, and you want grandma to die, and you want everyone's
Yeah.
parents to die, and they're like as if there was no valid economic question here, or not even just economic. I mean, if you're talking about the economy, you're still talking about people's health. You're still
Right.
talking about
The
people's
economy is
well-being.
Main Street.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's weird. I think when a lot of people think about economy, they think of it as like numbers and bars on a
Yeah.
graph, or maybe they just think about the stock market. They don't realize the
Right.
economy is the people. Like you are the economy. You going to work is the economy. You being able to
Right.
buy things, that's the economy. So if that collapses, then we're all in a lot of trouble. It's not this
Right.
weird sacrifice. Yeah.
Doctors are paid for by hospitals or businesses. Doctors are
Yes.
paid for by the economy, and
Yeah.
it's no surprise that for countries in the first world have better healthcare than countries in the third world. That's
Hmm.
historically always true. And you said the word grandma. It's so funny because if I were to even suggest, hey, maybe we should start reopening in states where there are no cases,
Yeah.
and people would say the first response would always be, oh, so you can make money on the stock market while
Yeah.
your grandma dies? And I don't think that's what I said.
Yeah.
Like, so, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. There was that weird dichotomy. So you couldn't even, I mean, I would make a comment, and, people who I knew were wealthy would text me and say, no, 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 we need to be all locked down now or
Mhm.
everyone's going to die. And I would say, well, look at Sweden. There's not everyone's dead there, and we don't really know all the data yet. And
Mhm.
every state had different policies, every country had different policies. There's no one policy here, and we do know that if you're homeless, you're 9 times more likely to die than someone who's not homeless. Like the
Mhm.
mortality rate of homeless people is much larger than non-homeless people. So you have to just what leader is weighing all of the decisions? And to your point, Zuby, no one is weighing it because there was this dichotomy. It's you
Yeah.
either this or you're this.
Yeah, and it's very strange. And I think there are quite a lot of reasons at the root of it. I think a big one is that we've just overall gotten too comfortable, right? Stuff has been so
Yeah.
good for the last few decades that, I mean, in some ways, this might sound a little bit crazy to some people, but maybe this is almost this so-called chaos that we've been seeing for the last few months. Maybe this is actually closer to the normal state of human beings throughout
Yeah.
history,
That's a good
and
point.
we were just sort of in a deep sleep for the past 30 or 40 years, right? So our grandparents, et cetera, would have seen a lot more stuff, right? They had, World War One, World War Two. You've had all of this stuff going on. So they were more used to a certain level of chaos and uncertainty and whatever. And we've just kind of been lulled out of it. We're kind of like, oh, wow, okay, it is possible. Pestilence has not finished, right? You can still have I mean, and again, I mean, this is not to downplay the coronavirus, but compared to previous pandemics, this is incredibly mild.
Yeah.
Incredibly mild. If you go and you look at the statistics from the Spanish flu or the Black Death, etc., and these are things that, if you catch it, you've got there might be a 50% chance they're going to die,
Yeah.
and affecting children and affecting babies and just totally relentless. Whereas with the coronavirus, I know people don't like to talk about numbers because it doesn't sound compassionate, but if you are under about 60, the probability of you dying is like less than 0.1%. It might be like zero point 0. Well, it's so marginal. And as well, people don't really like to talk about demographics. So the vast majority of people who are dying and who have died from it are elderly, a lot in nursing homes. In some areas, the average age of deaths from COVID is higher than the average life expectancy.
Yeah. In Italy, that was the case.
Yeah, and it's like people don't want to it's like people don't want to talk about that. And I'm
It,
like, well, this should inform policy because you don't want to treat an 18-year-old who is healthy the same way you treat an 80-year-old who's in a nursing home, who's way more vulnerable. You don't need to just throw this one size fits all model on everybody forever. And as soon as you start trying to have that conversation, it comes back to me wanting to kill your grandma. And I'm And I'm just kind of like, oh gosh, I don't know how to deal
And
with
you know,
this.
the irony is, like in New York State, where I live, the governor sent all the 80-year-olds
Yeah, I
back
saw
to their
that.
nursing homes. So
Yeah,
they actually, the lockdown response was to kill
crazy.
all the grandmas. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, uh, uh, you know, very healthy people were forced to stay home and shut down the economy. Like, I always wondered, why does a furniture store have to close down? It's not like 6,000 people try to crowd into furniture stores and give coronavirus to each other. Like, there were
Yeah.
many stores that weren't essential, but are now out of business, sadly.
Hmm.
And I know in New York City, where I am, you know, probably 50% of the restaurants are out of business forever.
Wow.
And, you know, it's not the, you could say that's not the worst thing that's ever happened to society, but
Hmm.
so all these people are really sad and struggling, and there's collateral fatalities, people who
Hmm.
couldn't get medical procedures during this time because all the hospitals were set aside for one disease only, which, like you say, wasn't as bad as the initial models
Yeah.
predicted. So then the whole goal began, oh, don't just save the healthcare system, let's completely eliminate the virus, which you would
Hmm.
never have as a goal for any virus. I mean, there were the two prior bigger pandemics were 1957, which was called the Asian flu, and then 1968, which was called the Hong Kong flu.
Hmm.
And more people died, unfortunately, then, and there were no shutdowns. I mean, Woodstock, which was this concert that there was zero there was the negative social distancing,
Yeah.
and there happened in the middle of the 1968 pandemic.
Mm.
So it's unclear. Maybe the government should just not have gotten involved. And then you say, oh, well, that's libertarian. Are you like an anarchist libertarian? No, I'm just trying to live my
Mm.
life and you know, do what I
Yeah.
was doing.
Yeah. It's like another thing people don't want to admit or accept is that, life has risks. When I get the people who are super crazy pro lockdown and who just want to lock down forever, I mean, a question I ask is, why don't we reduce the speed limit on highways to 20 miles per hour?
Yeah.
Right? If you want to save lives, right? You keep banging on to me about saving lives, and I'm big on saving lives too. But if we want to do that, we know that okay, more people die on the road every year than are dying from this. We could stop all of those deaths. And by the way, most of them are elderly people because they have lower reaction times. So why don't we reduce the speed limit to 20 or 30 miles per hour? Right? And then
Yeah.
people start saying, "Oh no, like that's," and it's like, well, every day we are making calculations between, it sounds callous, but realistically when you're making any policy, you are balancing liberty and freedom and practicality with safety and security, and you can't just nerf the entire world. You can't just, why don't we ban sugar, why don't we ban alcohol, ban cigarettes, right? Like obviously that'll save lives, ban cigarettes of
Right.
course,
Yeah,
but
cigarettes
it's
is probably the largest killer
yeah,
in the world. Like, almost the top five reasons people die are all cigarette related.
exactly. And we know that. So, why don't we just ban all those things? And when you state it that way, I do find, unless someone's super hard-headed, they can at least understand the idea you're getting at, that we do take risks. We have flu every year. I think 60,000 Americans every year
Yeah.
die of the flu. And we don't stop the entire, you don't shut everything down, you don't lock everybody in the house, etc. And I think also it's, people don't want to admit that you can get something wrong to begin with and change course. So I feel like people have been so emotionally invested and perhaps even politically invested in some cases in this the whole lockdown strategy that, of course you'll know about sunk costs, right? That you've already done this, you've already going down that line, and you just have to stick with it no matter what. Even if the data comes out and says, okay, you know what, 10 million Americans are not going to die of this virus. So you did all these procedures assuming that was the worst case, but we've actually found that's not the worst case. So you can change course now. But it's like, no, we're not going to change course. And the media doesn't want people to change course because then they'll, I don't know if they use this in the US, but in the UK, for example, Boris Johnson and other politicians have been accused of doing a U-turn, right? That's the phrase they use, that, they did a dramatic U-turn. And I'm like, sometimes you need to do a U-turn, right? If I'm
Yeah.
driving and I'm going down the wrong road, then a U-turn is a good maneuver. You shouldn't
Right. You're not
criticize
going to
me.
insist this
Right.
road should be going the way I'm going.
Yeah, and it's very bizarre. So it seems like the incentives are sort of set up the wrong way on a lot of
Oh,
levels. I think that's a big
well,
problem.
I think also, like you say, I think it was politicized. So it became this oddly in the United States between this oddly politicized thing between Democrats and Republicans.
Mm.
Like if you use one medicine, you were a Democrat, and if you use another medicine, you were a Republican,
Yeah, that's true,
and
actually.
that's like insane. Like my wife, she lived in Africa for 3 years, and she
Mm.
took hydroxychloroquine for every single day she was there because she didn't want herself or her family to get malaria.
Hmm.
And
So therefore, she loves Trump.
well, that's just it, right? Like just because she took that medicine 10 years ago, does that mean she's officially signed up for a political party? Like it was crazy. Or and then there's other things too that are just the other day we tr- we broke the law. So I own part of a comedy club in New York City, and I said screw it, let's go outside, let's get some speakers, and let's throw a comedy show in the street.
Mm.
And 50 to 100 people showed up. People were passing by. Some of the best comedians in the city showed up and started performing.
Hmm.
And about an hour in, the police shut us down because it wasn't enough social distancing. And
Sure.
then those same police go downtown to protect the rioting and the looting, and make sure those people aren't arrested. So
Yeah.
it was insane what was going on. But you can't, sometimes you have to look at it, and you can either let it affect you and say, this is insane, it really bothers me and twists me up inside. Or you can say, hey, I've only got 8 more hours left before I'm sent to the next dimension on my mission. What should I do now to be the best I can be? And
Mm.
sometimes that's going to be not solving the problems of the world, because it's just insane. It's just irrational. Like in England, the main mathematical model that created a lot of these decisions for the pandemic was created by Neil Ferguson at Imperial College. And he said everybody's got a social distance, or 10 million people could die, 2 million in England can die. And then it turns out he wasn't social distancing. He was meeting the married woman of someone who had coronavirus, and they were having their fling. And he
Yeah.
had even specifically said loved ones who are apart right now need to stay apart.
Yeah.
So it was so irrational. Shouldn't everybody have, like, if this was a movie, everyone would have said, oh, well, just reverse everything then, because this guy was lying to us or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And then the movie would end good. Like everybody would be dancing in the streets. But no, you're right. Like we kind of had this sunken cost. Like we've got to stick to this
Hmm.
lockdown to the end. And of course that's created that's let other angers rise up to the top,
Yeah.
which has
Yeah.
led to this worldwide. People don't even know now why they're rioting and
Mm-mm.
looting. There's no answer. And it's hard to say what's going to be a solution. And I think, again, you have to think to yourself, okay, well, the only thing I can do is be the best person I can be. I need to come up with ideas. I need to
Mhm.
come up with solutions that work. And if people listen to them, that's fine. If they don't, I move on to the next solutions, or I keep on improving myself. I'm going to write a book that will help or entertain, or I'm going to create a podcast that will help or entertain, or I'm going to do my job and make food or clothes or devices that could make people's lives better. And you're right, maybe we've been protected somehow in the past 30 years, but that's because quality of life in general has risen around the world.
Mhm.
But there's still a lot of these simmering cracks in the system that never quite got patched up,
Yeah.
and that's part of the difficulty here.
Yeah, it's the whole situation is very difficult, and I think it's accelerated a lot of things. It's shown a light on a lot of things, and then it's also created its own problems directly. I mean, I'm generally an optimist. I consider myself like an optimistic realist. So I think in the long term, stuff will be okay because things always seem to work out all right in the long term. But yeah, in the short term, it just seems like I don't know. It, emotions have really hijacked rational thought.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, I know there's always been a degree of it, but it does seem like in the last 10 years, and I can't fail to notice this totally coincides with the rise of smartphones and social media, but it's just like people are so amped up. Like I can talk to you and we can have a rational discussion and not assume the worst version of what the other person says and talk about ideas, and disconnect our emotions from it to a healthy degree. But it seems like so many people just cannot do that. And it almost seems like another virus that is spreading because, there's people I talk to, even loved ones, and I'm trying to have a rational conversation, or I can even present facts, or I present data, and people are telling me that their feelings override the data, right? And I'm kind of like, well, how can we have a conversation if we can't even just accept that this is the data, and now we can discuss it and we can explain why it's like this, and we may have different ideas, or we may have different ideas on what to do. But I just don't remember so many people before thinking that making every decision just based on emotion and feeling was a good idea. But I'm sort of seeing this happening en masse, and I feel like I'm in a relative minority of people who is willing to just be like, okay, can we just calm down for a second and not make these false binaries? Like, okay, we can't lock down forever and have everybody lose their job, and the virus is not going to go away. We don't even know if there will be a vaccine, or if it will be effective, or when it will come. So we know we can't just lock down for eternity. That's not possible. We also know there is a virus, and okay, this is the death rate. And so we need to take these certain precautions, and we don't need to go all one way or all the other. And it just seems like so many people just can't do that now. And I don't really know what has happened to the collective human psyche that's created that.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, there's a lot of people who I used to respect who, now that this is kind of bubbled to the top, this kind of irrational, just thinking from emotions, and I see this and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to spend time with this person
Mm,
probably anymore. And again, not out of anger, not because I'm bitter against them, but just because I realize, oh, this is not the sort of person I want to associate with. I maybe there's even some people I really respected and I wanted them to respect me that I'm like, you know what? It's fine. I don't
mm,
need their respect anymore.
yeah.
And on the one hand, that was a healthy thing for me. On the other hand, it's a little bit sad, but you can't really have a conversation with those people. Like it's not worth it. Like
No.
you're just going to get angry, and that this is valuable time where you could have been working on music or working on yourself or spending time with people you love, because they're never going to no one ever changes their mind. I've rarely seen it. Like you said, sometimes it's a rare thing when someone does a
Yeah.
U-turn. Like it's a great thing, but it's very rare. And I always, like, again, this has been so irrational, so many aspects. It's like you said, of this virus, okay, 10 million people didn't die, 100,000 people died, which is horrible. Like you said,
Yes.
when you bring up
Yes.
numbers, it's horrible. And you have to always, by the way, when you say 100,000 people died, you always have to follow with, and that's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Every death is sad.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, 1% of the predicted number died. And then people say, well, it's because of the lockdowns. And I'm like, well, that's not really true, because you look at other countries that didn't lock down, they were okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, oh, well, that's because they did contact and trace. Well, you look at Arizona, which had no real cases in the United States, and they didn't really do anything. And it's just, there's no, then people say, well, just wait, in 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
everybody in Arizona is going to be dead.
Yeah. No,
And
no one wants to just admit that, you know what? Okay. Like I was wrong. I was wrong. Or, I overestimated or I underestimated. And yeah, and that's fine. I think one thing that really needs to be cured in Western society is the idea that people cannot change their minds, or that changing
yeah,
a mind is terrible, or it's totally the opposite, or that or that you can't just say I don't know, right? Like
right.
some people.
Yeah, right. I don't know is the real key thing, because part of the problem is having an opinion. And, even scientists, like, take Galileo. Galileo is the scientist. He stood on top of, I don't know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and he dropped a small, like a pebble and a boulder. And if you had an opinion, you would have said, well, the boulder is obviously going to hit the ground first. But it turns out they both hit the ground at the same time, and it
Mhm,
changed completely the laws of physics that one moment. If he had stuck to an opinion, he maybe never would have done that experiment. He never would have asked the question.
mhm,
And then the people who did have an opinion, they tortured him.
mhm,
So the key often is not to have an opinion so quickly, and to take a step back and ask the questions. And hope people will listen. And if people are ready to listen, maybe people will be, maybe people won't be. And again, the key, the world develops as each individual develops. If you develop as a human, then the entire world just got a tiny bit better. And I think the people who are arguing on Twitter, and you know, we all were raised with this fight or flight instinct. And now people, when you have fight or flight, you either fight or you run, and you use that adrenaline. But now people get fight or flight while they're staring at a computer screen and they don't move.
Yeah.
And so an entire billions of people are feeling fight or flight right now, but they're just frozen in front of a computer screen, living in this imaginary world. And, you know, it's at those moments you have to pull away until you have something real to offer. And it's, you know, it's a challenge. Like, you know, and you don't want it to dissuade you from your real mission, which is growing as a human being. And that's how society, that's how the collective really grows.
Yeah.
You know, but it's hard.
Yeah. And, you know, I've said this before, which is that when it comes to social media, we are currently living in perhaps the biggest human experiment of all time, where we really don't even have a clue or just an inkling of what the long-term effects are. I mean, we have never, prior to this time, it's never been possible to communicate with people on this scale. And it's not, you know, in terms of the way human beings are designed and animals are designed, like we're not supposed to be able to, you know, millions of people are not supposed to be able to potentially hear this conversation.
Right.
I'm not supposed to be able to just take my phone and send a message to hundreds of thousands of people just by tapping a few buttons without leaving my living room. Like, we forget how new this is. We're so used to it now. But, you know, I'm a relatively young guy, but this is so new. And we're all acting like this is normal, getting likes and retweets and comments. And, you know, even if you look at the vast majority of things people get outraged by, like, it's good that we know that I'm here in the UK and I know about this George Floyd situation, right? It's good that I know that happens, but I kind of shouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, millions and millions of people around the world shouldn't necessarily know all of these things that are happening, especially when it's things that are less important. So the other day there was that huge outrage. I think it was in New York, right? There was the woman in the park who called the police and said, "Hey,
Yeah.
an African American man, da da da," and the outrage from that was global. Okay, but. And, you know, and I've had people in the UK asking me my opinion on it, and, you know, people messaging me and sending me the video, etc. And a part of me is kind of like, none of us should even be aware of this. Do you see what I mean? Like this was an interaction between two people in a park, which was, you know, nobody died, nobody was harmed, nothing. It was, you know, you can look at it and analyze society or analyze that person, etc. But we are all, millions of people are now chiming in on something that we wouldn't have been aware of 15 years ago. And no one sort of steps away and thinks about that and is like, wow, like, I mean, it's not hard to find individual interactions around the world that we would be horrified by. But if we were informed about all of them, then we would go crazy. And it's no surprise that people are kind of going increasingly crazy, because you're seeing all of this stuff, all of the videos from what's going on in the US. Like, I feel like I'm almost there. I'm not even in the country, but I'm seeing buildings burning. I'm seeing people looting. I'm seeing all of these things happening. And it angers me. It outrages me. But at the same time, I shouldn't know about it. And
but at the same time, social media is great too. Like,
it is. Oh, yeah.
Let's call it social networking instead of social media. That was the original name, of social networking.
Yeah.
And that's when people like you and I could meet and become friends and be on each other's podcasts and communicate and use these platforms to inspire people or help people or provide solutions. Like, oh, you need to provide for your family. Here's 5 techniques that I might know about that you might not know about, and I'll share them. And so this sharing economy, this sharing media, networking, and so on is also a really great thing.
Definitely.
But you're right. But we get addicted to, I need to be heard. I need to be retweeted. I need to be liked. And that's this kind of addiction to this dopamine neurochemical where we need more. Like, if everybody wakes up in the morning and thinks, well, what tweet can I do that the most people will like?
Mhm.
And if you fall too much into that trap, I could just say, hey, I love Donald Trump or I love Joe Biden, don't you?
Yeah.
And everybody will retweet.
Yeah,
I'll get
yeah, no,
10,000
yeah.
retweets, and like it's hard to be not polarized because then
Yeah.
you're not liked as much.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think just this last night we go to sleep and we think, well, what's going to happen? What are we going to learn in the morning? Well, we wake up in the morning and this building burned down by rioters and people were run over, and it's just scary.
Yeah.
And I think I think part of the challenge now is hopefully we don't get too sucked into the negative aspects of this, and we
Mm.
continue to enjoy the positive. Ideas only happen when we can share ideas and have discourse and come
Yes.
to compromise, and maybe you ask a question where gets me thinking, and I ask a question back, and through this questioning and inquiry,
Mhm.
ideas are discovered and experiments are designed and theories are proven. And but if everybody's just got opinions and no questions, then that's probably going down the wrong path. And I know for me personally, whenever I've regretted my past, like, oh, I shouldn't have gambled on this or invested in this or spent or behaved like this,
Mm.
and filled myself with regret. That wasn't the pathway to success. The pathway to success was, well, what was I doing right when I succeeded before? Was I taking care of myself? Well, what ways was I taking care of myself? In what ways was I being creative? How can I double down on that? And one thing we've seen during this lockdown is the people who have doubled down on creating content
Mhm.
that's inspired hope and safety and some degree of optimism. I
Mhm.
think those people were rewarded during this time versus the people who were just angry. Maybe
Yeah.
the people who were angry feel like they accomplished something, but they didn't really. Like maybe they got a few more likes, but
Mhm.
it was just in this echo chamber, and we had the lockdown anyway, and people who wanted to opened up anyway. But I think there is opportunities here for people who create content
Yep.
and double down on that,
Mhm.
just like you have during this period. You know, that's what does well, which is always being a voice for safety and for hope and for improvement. That will always do well, as opposed to arguing or finding trolls and blocking them and reporting them, and you know it's
It's
just
tricky.
yeah, it's tricky, but there are methodologies to improve, to take a step back and say, well, I don't know, but I'm going to write down 10 questions today, or
Mhm.
10 lessons I can take, or 10 books I can write, or 10 businesses I could start. And maybe you don't start those 10 businesses, but it just exercises that idea muscle, and it allows you to put yourself into a position where you're more likely to improve the world than less likely.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I mean, to me, it's just I view social media like a tool. It's a tool, like a knife. A knife is not inherently good or bad. You can use a knife to do wonderful things, to cook and create something, or you can use a knife to attack somebody or to kill something. And I guess from my own personal perspective, like I love social media, right? I wouldn't be able to really do what I do and be known how I'm known without it. So I personally really like it. The thing that does concern me is I know that we're both creators, but most people are not. Right? Most people are, we all consume, but most people on social media are purely consuming, and that is sort of the part that concerns me. It's not for myself.
Yeah.
I'm a very cool, level-headed, fairly unemotional guy, but I really know that most people are not. I've got a fairly unique personality. I'm very creative. I'm very low in neuroticism. I don't Someone can write all this horrible stuff about me and I don't get really affected by it, but I know that the average person is not me. So when you take that and you multiply it by hundreds of millions or billions,
Yeah.
I mean, you can see this if you look at depression rates rising, anxiety rates rising amongst teenagers. More teenage girls are self-harming, etc. And it's all correlated with how much they use social media. Now, I know that correlation and causation are not the same thing, but at some point it's kind of like, and you look at little things like Instagram deciding to remove likes. Why did they do that? Because they themselves were starting to see, oh, wow, maybe what we're doing here is having a real psychological impact on a lot of people. and maybe it'll be all right. But I just think we're so new to it all that we don't
Yeah.
know. Okay, when I'm 70 years old, that's when we'll be able to look back and be like, okay, this was the effect of this thing. And
I wonder, I hope so. I wonder when there's a point where I could say, well, that switch has just turned off on my brain. I can relax now.
yeah,
I don't know if it'll ever happen. Like, I
yeah,
think there's always this feeling of these questions of, am I relevant, or can I be more out there? Can I do more? Can more people like me?
hmm,
And I don't know if that ever really goes away without really, you know, I used to be proud of myself that I would never hit the home button on Facebook or Twitter. So I used Facebook and Twitter to create content and put it out there and interact with people on my page. But I would never look at just the
oh,
general
okay, I see.
arguments of society. But now, because I don't really trust the news,
Mm,
I get my news from hitting home on
mm,
Twitter.
mm.
And because of the pandemic and now this protesting, I feel like I need to see the news. But maybe it's still not important to hit
Yeah.
the home button, and I should get back to that, because it's not like, okay, yes, if I'm about to get looted, I should probably find out what's going on. Or if I'm thinking of what's going to happen to my kids, should I send them to school for
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of coronavirus? I should find out what's going on. But even then, there's better sources than a random anonymous tweeter. Like, I could call up someone, or I could call up several people who are doctors, or I could call up, several people who are, leaders in society, and or listen to their podcasts, or read their blogs or newsletters. I still don't really have to hit the home button and get exposed to all the nonsense.
Yeah.
And again, I think it always gets back to probably the best thing any one person could do. It's really not a battle between the collective and the individual.
Mhm,
The individual improving will always help the collective. So if you're in the tribe 20,000 years ago,
mhm.
if you get better at hunting wild boar, all you've done is improve yourself, but that helps the tribe. It doesn't, if you get better at the politics of the tribe,
Yeah.
that probably helps nobody.
Yeah, that's true. Until you get the hater who wants to take you out because you've got better boar killing ability. But
Yeah, but then because you've got better boar killing ability, you
you
could
can,
probably take
yeah,
down the hater.
you can take him
So
down.
that's the
Yeah.
beta and you're the alpha. By the way,
Awesome.
it's not so bad to be the omega either. Then you don't have to eat as much because you're weaker. You don't have to defend yourself as much, and like, you're not competing for the opposite sex, so you could just like hang out and smoke weed or whatever and relax. And if you get killed, well, okay, it happens, but whatever.
That's funny, man. Awesome, man. So one question I do want to ask, man, before we wrap up is, of course, we've been talking about a lot of, a lot of positive stuff, some of the negative stuff, some of the crazy stuff. What are you feeling most optimistic about right now?
Well, it's like when you said you were kind of an optimist realist. I am very much that as well. And sometimes I get accused too much of being an optimist.
Hmm.
Like during the financial recession in 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis, I would often go on CNBC, which is the financial news channel here, and I was optimistic. I was like, look, there's a lot of good things happening in the economy once we solve these problems and blah blah blah. And I remember one time I went on TV, and afterwards my mom called me and she said, maybe you shouldn't smile so much. Like, the stock market's going down and you're smiling on the TV. And I'm like, but mom, this is the exact time, like, things are going to get better from here. Like, this is the exact time to smile.
Mm,
And, but for the first time during this period, I'm a little bit more pessimistic, in part because I'm a little more uncertain what's
mm.
going to happen. Like, things are going, coronavirus is not even in the news anymore in the
Nope.
United States.
No.
It's just the protesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a week ago, it was all about, well, did you social distance?
Mm.
Now it's like nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just people are just running down the street screaming. and it's not gonna, so it's clearly this news driven hysteria. And with some, there really was a virus, and there really
Hmm.
are these cracks in the system that's leading to the protesting, but a lot of the panic is news driven. And but I am optimistic that we'll get over this period. And because at some point enough people will say, hey, I need to now feed my family. I need to get better at, you know, what I do, whether I'm a writer or an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor. I need to improve. And uh, people do wear out of the anger. Like, even, there's always been these wars, and the wars have been horrific, but the wars, you send the military to meet each other and fight each other, but the civilians stay home and continue building if they can.
Mm-hmm.
And, at least that's been the way for the past couple hundred years. And, at some point, we're going to all just return home and say, listen, we need to just grow and build. We just sent a rocket into space. We're working on, all these amazing biotech and genomics cures and technologies. We're improving, our ability to communicate with each other and to travel faster. And, hopefully the elements of democracy will be improved through this. So I am, largely optimistic, but I'm just a little disturbed how easy it was for people to get swept up into this polarization. That's been a new thing, and I don't know what it's caused by. So, maybe social media, maybe some people say income inequality. All I know is I can improve myself today, and that will make the world better, because it'll make me better able to communicate and to have discussions like this with you, and not be so like, well, we need this and that, and we need to execute these people now. And, because that's what it could turn into, some kind of like hysterical, like murder-oriented society.
Well, I saw at one of the protests, someone brought along a flipping guillotine. It was probably a prop, but it was still pretty dark.
Yeah, it's certainly symbolic of a really bad time in the early 1800s,
Yeah.
just at a moment when people were optimistic that there would be more freedom and liberty and civil liberties and so on. France had a little bit of setback doing it with the guillotine. And, and you could see the same thing happening in the US, on social media, like people are metaphorically killing each other. But again, I think this is also an opportunity to have new ideas, to have new solutions, to take a step back and say, well, how can we, take another leap forward in society and have different reforms and understand, where did we go wrong? Hopefully people will say, well, how could we have analyzed this disease better? Hopefully this will lead to increases in genomics and biotech and vaccine technology. And, in terms of the protesting, hopefully this could lead to some police reform, criminal justice reform, the way law enforcement is conducted. Just like in France, the French Revolution did lead to democracy, but it took a while. And, hopefully it doesn't take as long. And again, as individuals, it doesn't have to take long at all.
100%, man. James, so good to have you on the show. Before we go, where can people find you online?
You can find me online at TikTok, James Altucher on TikTok.
Oh, okay. TikTok, man. Okay.
Or Instagram, Twitter, my podcast, The James Altucher Show, and, all over the place. I have a book coming out a year from now called Skip the Line, about how people can change passions and interests at any point in their lives and reach the top 1% as quickly as possible of that interest, and in order to make money from it. And, hopefully we all get safely to the other side of this right now.
I'm sure we will, man. James, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really good to speak to you and have you share your wisdom and insight.
Yeah, Zuby, thanks for asking me. And look, I hopefully we'll all be traveling fairly, sooner rather than later. I was in England 4 or 5 times in the past year, and I'm looking forward to going back there, and let's hang out.
Yeah, definitely. Just let me know, man.